Dear God, your will, nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. Please guide me. Amen. Today is the third and final week of our three-part sermon series called Seeds of Envy. First, we took a look at the story of Cain and Abel, and we watched as he tried to build himself up by tearing other people down, and we found that that doesn't work. There is no real competition in life. We are all in this together. There is only who we used to be and who we have yet to become. And then we watched as a little bit later in the story, we watched as a different set of brothers, Jacob and Esau. They fought over the birthright. And we discovered that even if you are technically correct, even if you're right, there is a better and a worse way to go forward. There's a better and worse way to live your life. How we get where we are is more important than where we go. And now we're taking a look at the last story in our series, the story of Joseph, King of Dreams. Now this is the story of Joseph. It's a long story with twists and turns, but if you take a look at it, there's so much that we can pull out of this story. And so let's take a look at it together, you and I. We open our story on a man named Jacob. Now this is the same Jacob from last week, but it's much later in the story. Jacob has lots of kids. He has 12 sons, which I just can't even imagine. He has 12 sons. And Joseph is his favorite. Now the thing about having a large family is that sometimes the older siblings can help the parents to raise the younger siblings. And in that way, a large family can become really strong. They can be really amazing. It's a kind of a united front. They're all in this together. But if the older siblings don't help, then it kind of becomes a competition for affection. And with so many kids and so few parents, that competition can really rip things to pieces. It can be brutal. And so Joseph is the favorite, and the brothers, they hate him. It is so strong. And then Dad gives him a really nice robe. It's like a really fancy garment. It says it's a long robe with long sleeves. So the brothers, they hate him all the more. And then on top of everything else, Joseph starts to have these dreams. And he has this dream where the sun and the moon and the 11 stars, like his 11 brothers, they all bow down to Joseph. So Joseph goes and tells his family, he's like, hey, I had this dream where everyone bows down to me. Which, of course, was just really, really popular for him to go around saying that. Quick show of hands, how many of us have brothers and sisters? Anybody have siblings? Yeah, most of us, right? Can you imagine, especially younger siblings, I don't know why, but especially, can you imagine if your siblings going around saying, hey, I had this dream where I'm better than you. I had this dream, and I'm so much better than you. Right? And so, and this isn't the first time. This is kind of a constant thing. He has this other dream before the one with the sun and the moon and all the stars. He has this dream with bundles of wheat, where his bundle of wheat stands upright. And this is what he says to his brothers. My bundle of wheat stands upright, and all your bundles of wheat bow down to mine. Isn't that cool? He's just digging a hole. It's terrible. So the next part of the story shouldn't surprise us. The brothers are plotting to kill Joseph. So they go out into a field, which we learned a couple of weeks ago is just the best place to plan a murder. And so they're out there in the field, and they're thinking, let's kill him and throw him in one of these pits. That'll be great. And of course, there's one brother who feels a little guilty, thinks maybe this is wrong. And so the one brother, Reuben, he says, well, how about we don't kill him? What if we just throw him down in the pit? And then the Bible tells us that his plan was to come back later after all the brothers were gone and then free Joseph, bring him back home. And so that's exactly what they do. Joseph shows up, and they take his fancy coat, and they rip it to shreds, and they throw him down in the pit. And then, of course, as all murderers do, they sit down and have lunch. So they're eating when some slavers walk by, and the other brother, Judah, he has this idea, and he says, oh, well, why would we leave him in the pit? We could make a little money off of this. Why don't we sell him into slavery? And so that's what they do. They sell him into slavery, and he gets taken to Egypt, where he's sold to a man named Potiphar. And then the brothers, they take the jacket, this amazing coat that he had, and they rip it up, and they cover it in animal's blood. And they take it to the father, and they say, an animal killed him. Joseph's been eaten by a wild animal. And Jacob's all heartbroken, and so now Joseph is in Egypt. And there's a moment in most stories when everything falls apart and our main character snaps. There's this understanding that good people come from good situations, but then when bad stuff starts to happen, it's okay to start being a bad person. But that's kind of how it goes, but not Joseph. He clings to God. He went from favorite son to slave, and now he still clings to God. And so now he's in Egypt. And he actually does quite well in Potiphar's house. Everything he does succeeds. And so he rises through the ranks until he is the head slave. He's the head slave over the entire house. Things are going really well for him until we introduce Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife comes into the picture now. Apparently, Joseph was a good-looking man. He's a good-looking slave. And Potiphar's wife noticed. And so when Joseph rejects her advances, he says no. She lies about it, and he ends up in prison. He does the right thing, and it lands him in prison. Favorite son, slave, prisoner. And again, there's a moment in a story when bad things happen. Everything falls apart. And there's a moment when it all becomes too much, and they just forget God. This isn't working out, and they turn away. And not just in these stories, but in our personal lives as well. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people, and they've said, they explain that they haven't been to church in years because of, and then insert reason. You know, someone died and they weren't supposed to die. Someone lost their job or they can't find a job. Something bad happened. Somebody was rude to them. When bad things happen, people turn away from the church and they turn away from God. The phrase I hear a lot is, I'm just not ready to go back there. I'm just not ready for God anymore. But not Joseph. Joseph clings to God. He does the right thing. He doesn't sleep with Potiphar's wife. And he still ends up in prison. So he goes to prison. And even in prison, he's being a nice guy. There's two other prisoners in the prison with him. There's a baker and a cupbearer. The cupbearer is the guy who holds the cup standing next to the throne. And they're both in prison, and they both have these weird dreams. And Joseph's standing there. And they tell him about his dreams, and God tells Joseph how to interpret it, and Joseph tells them, and he's right. For the cupbearer, the dream meant that he was going to get his job back. He was going to get released from prison and go back to Pharaoh's throne room. And he did. And for the baker, his dream meant that he was going to get executed. And he did, just like the dream said. And then Joseph remained in prison for another 2 years. I wonder how many times in those 2 years was Joseph tempted to reject God? How many times in those 2 years did he say, if this is what I get for following God, if this is what I get for being a good guy, to heck with it, why would I bother? How many times did he ask himself that? And then Pharaoh has a dream, and it's a weird dream. I like the way the Jesus Storybook Bible put it. It was a weird dream with skinny cows and fat cows, and the skinny cows are eating the fat cows. And Pharaoh and his advisors, they have no idea what to make of this. They're clueless. They're like, this is just weird. And so they're sitting there discussing this. Pharaoh's sitting on his throne, and all his advisors are there, and they're discussing this. And while they're talking, the cupbearer is standing right there next to the throne. What a coincidence. And eventually the cupbearer speaks up and says, you know, I knew a guy. When I was in prison, I knew a guy. And I had a dream, and he interpreted it, and he was right. And so Pharaoh sends for Joseph, and they clean him up. They get him out of prison. They bring him before Pharaoh, and they tell him the dream. And this leads, and God tells Joseph how to interpret the dream, and then Joseph tells Pharaoh. And this leads to our second scripture lesson for today, where Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge of all Egypt. He is second only to Pharaoh. Now there's a lot more to the story. I breezed over a ton of content. And there's even more after that we don't have time to go into the details today. But I will say this. Eventually, Joseph meets up with his brothers again. And he's second in command of all of Egypt. And his brothers have no idea who he is. They don't recognize him at all. And they are all bowing down to the second most powerful man in Egypt, just like the dream said. And they don't recognize him. And so Joseph decides to test them. He decides to put them through a test before he forgives them. You see, after Jacob, the father, after he lost Joseph, he was just heartbroken. But what he did was he took one of the other younger brothers, Benjamin. He took him under his wing. Benjamin was the new favorite, just like Joseph used to be the favorite. And the brothers all know that Benjamin is the favorite. And so what Joseph does is he takes Benjamin and tosses him in jail, just to see what the other brothers would do, to see if they'd be happy to get rid of the favorite son again, or to see if their hearts had changed. They were no longer ruled by jealousy. When he throws Benjamin into jail, they panic, they freak out, they beg him, please, no, you can't throw him in jail. Take me instead. Put me in jail instead. And only then, only after they have proven themselves to be changed men, then Joseph comes forward and says, it's me. I'm your brother Joseph. And it's this amazing moment of reconciliation. There's no other story quite like it. It's an opportunity for forgiveness that most families don't get. So that's the story. It's got its ups and downs, laughs and tears. But I want to take a second and bring it all the way back to the beginning. Bring it all the way back to the whiny, annoying, favorite brother. Now this sermon series, The Seeds of Envy, is all about jealousy. It's all about envy. And all three stories are about brothers fighting. And I think that's intentional. See, family, our brothers, our sisters, they get to see us at our worst. They see the side of us that we don't try to show to everyone. Because we all do this thing where we go out into the real world, we kind of put on a mask, right? We try to seem a little bit more collected, a little bit more composed and put together when we're out here in the public world, when we're at the grocery store, or at the bank, or whatever, right? But our family, our brothers and sisters, they get to see us at home, the ugly side of things, when we're not all put together. Nope, lost it. Family sees us at the ugly side. Yeah, so we read the story of the favorite child going on and on about his dreams and how great he is. And then we get to the part where the brothers want to toss him in a pit. And we get it. It's understandable. If you've ever fought with a sibling, you understand the urge to push him into a pit. Maybe vipers, there we go. Wow, it's venomous over there. It almost seems reasonable. How many of us have dreamed of mailing our younger sibling to Timbuktu at some point in life? Maybe that's just me. It almost seems reasonable. But the thing is, with these stories, with every story, Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, there's a moment. There's a moment when envy turns into action. You see, envy is a seed. It starts small. But if we nurture it, it will grow. If we let it stay in our hearts, it will poison us. It will blossom in our heart. Understandable envy is still envy. Hatred, reasonable hatred, hatred that makes sense, is still hatred. In Matthew chapter 5 is just loaded with stuff. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says this. He says, you've heard it said that in ancient times, to those in ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. That makes sense. Don't kill each other, right? Or you'll be judged. But I say to you, if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. You don't even have to do it. The anger in your heart is enough. It goes on to say, if you insult your brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. If you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, and you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there. Go reconcile. I should actually do it. Go first be reconciled to your brother or sister. Then come and offer your gift. What Jesus is saying, we need to squish the seed before it has a chance to grow. Squish the seed of envy before it has a chance to grow. Create a life where sin, envy cannot grow. You see, sin starts small. It always starts small. But if we let it stay there, it grows, it grows, it grows until it's destroying everything. These stories in the Bible, they're here to guide us, to warn us, to help us. So what we do here in the church, we're worshiping God, but part of that worship is we're coming together to figure out a way to create a life that is fertile ground for love to grow and is like a concrete slab for evil. There's no chance for it to get a foothold in us. That's why we're here. That's what we're doing. And so there are 3 things that we can do to create a life where envy cannot grow. The first thing we can do, praise one another. Get excited for things that don't benefit you, for people outside yourself. One of the greatest indicators that you are rejecting envy is getting excited about something that has nothing to do with you. You don't benefit from it, but you're still so excited for that person. When somebody else gets a promotion, congratulate them. Praise one another. Support one another in love. That's one of the greatest ways to fight envy. Reject envy by praising the people around you. The second thing we can do is live a life worth living. The first thing we can do is praise the people around us. The second thing we can do is live a life worth living. Remember, the how matters. Life is more like a game of tag than a race to the finish line. It doesn't matter who gets there first. It matters how you get there. Are you living a life? Are you proud of how you are living your life? Are you proud of how you're living? Remember, God is not impressed with stuff. God is not impressed with money. God is not impressed with accomplishments. God is impressed with love. That's what he cares about. How we get somewhere is more important than where we go. Remember, even if you move mountains with your faith, it doesn't matter if we don't have love. The ends do not justify the means, so live a life worth living. And the third thing we can do to combat envy is cling to God. Number 1, praise each other, lift each other up, get excited for each other's lives. Number 2, live a life worth living. Remember, the ends don't justify the means. And number 3, cling to God. God is with you every step of the way. He offers us a better way every single time we choose the path of pain. God was with Cain when he made the wrong choice and murdered his brother. God was with Jacob and Esau when Jacob had to flee from the anger of his brother. God was with Joseph when he got tossed into the pit. God was with Joseph when he gets tossed into prison. God is always there offering us a better way. It's funny, when you spend your entire life focused on God, you barely notice the squabbles around you. Our life here on this earth is all about discovery. We have an opportunity, a chance, every single day we wake up to find God's love in the world, to catch a glimpse of that grace, just a moment of that mercy. Our world's trying really hard to stamp it out, but it is there. And if we search for it, we can find it. God is there moving in the world. And it's only when we stop searching for God that we even notice all the competitions around us. And I use finger quotes on competitions because there are no competitions if you're clinging to God. God is with us every step of the way. But here's the thing about clinging to God. It is both more important and more difficult when bad things happen. I want you to take a moment. Close your eyes if it helps. I want you to think about your friends and family. I want you to think about the people who do not go to church anymore. The people who you love and they are in your life. Think about the reason that they are not sitting next to you right now. Now, this is not always the case, but a lot of times when bad things happen, people go looking for someone to blame. You can open your eyes and be like, they go looking for someone to blame, and when they can't find someone to blame, they blame God. Whatever the situation is, they think God has abandoned them. And if God has abandoned them, well, they're just going to abandon God right back. Which doesn't help anyone, but that's what we do. It's our mentality. They look at the rains that come in life, and they think, if this is what happens when I'm a good person, this is what happens when I follow God, to heck with it. Why would I bother? Why would I bother following God if bad things are still going to happen? Now, some people, they kind of wince when I say stuff like that. They don't like asking those questions because some of us don't have the answers on that. Jesus tells a story about building 2 houses. You've probably heard it before. He builds the first house on the sand. and the rains come and the house collapses. And then a different man builds his house on the rock, on a firm foundation, and the rains come, and that house stands firm. But what I want to point out about that story is that the rains fall on both houses. Bad things happen. Finding someone to blame does not make anything better. Finding someone to blame doesn't matter. It doesn't make anything better. God created a world of love, and we managed to mess that up. We ruined that. So God created the ideas of forgiveness and reconciliation and coming back together. He gives us that choice. But while we are waiting for redemption, while we're waiting for that moment of coming back together, God is standing right next to us in the rain. God is enduring the rain with us. He's standing right next to us in the rain. God was with Joseph in the beginning. God was with Joseph in the middle, and God was with Joseph in the end. And another thing I wanted to point out is that Joseph never could have gotten to where he got, to where he did, without the bad things in life. If he had stayed in his father's house as the favorite son, he wasn't the oldest, so he wasn't going to inherit everything. He probably just would have ended up being the spoiled baby of the family. That's where he was headed. But then bad things happened, and he ended up a slave in Potiphar's house, and then he started doing well again. But if nothing bad had happened, he would have stayed in Potiphar's house, and the best he could have done was chief slave, which is no good. And then the bad things happened, and Joseph ended up second only to Pharaoh himself. And we didn't really talk about this very much today, but there was a famine in the land. That was what Pharaoh's dream was about. And if Joseph hadn't been there, if he hadn't been there to show them what the dream meant, thousands of people would have died of starvation in this 7 years without food. But because Joseph was there, they were able to prepare. Thousands of people survived because of what Joseph did. None of that could have happened without the bad things. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in 8th grade, I used to run track in middle school. I was very short and I was not very fast. But all my friends were in track, so I wanted to be in track. And after practice, I would always stand on the sidewalk and wait for my dad to come pick me up. There was always my dad because my mom worked late, but my dad would come pick me up. And one day it started raining during practice. And of course they canceled practice because it was just gross out and there was the fear of the lightning and all that. So we all had to go into the office and call our parents, call for a ride, and then we had to go back out in the rain and wait for our parents to come. And I was out there maybe 20 minutes standing in the rain. It wasn't particularly cold, but I was soaking wet. I was so mad. When my dad finally, I'm an 8th grade boy, so of course I didn't have my jacket. And I'd never heard of an umbrella before. So when my dad got there, I was drenched. I was just soaking wet. And I was so mad at him. I get in the car and I'm just yelling. I'm like, look at me, I'm all wet. I'm soaking wet and it is your fault. Even though my dad dropped everything. When I called him, he dropped everything and raced over to come and pick me up an hour early. It took him 20 minutes to get to me. And I just needed someone to blame. I was so frustrated that I was wet. I wasn't happy that I was now out of the rain. I'm no longer getting rained on. Things were looking up. I'm headed in a good direction. Didn't matter. Wanted someone to blame. And so I just ranted at my dad. In life, when bad things happen, we can abandon God. But God never abandons us. God loves you. He is always there for you. We can know that we are loved and that somehow we are going to get through this. Even if our reward is not here on this planet, even if we have to wait till eternity to get our reward, we can trust in a God who loves us. He will take care of us. So I have a challenge for you this week. I want you to think about someone in your life, someone who has fallen away from God. We all have that one friend who just doesn't come to church anymore, for whatever reason. And the challenge this week is I want you to reach into their lives. I want you to bring God back into their life in some way. Maybe that means inviting them to church. Maybe that means inviting them to like a Bible study or something. Whatever it takes. Maybe they're not ready to come back into this building yet. Maybe they're not ready for that. So just somehow reach into their life. Bring God back into their life. Let them know that God is still there for them. God still cares about them. He's waiting for us. He is with us every step of the way. You see, I can't reach those people. I don't know them. They're not here. I know you guys, because you're here. But I don't know them. I need your help. Only you can do this. Please. All right. So we made it. Seeds of envy. The beginning of sin and the beginning of the Bible. And so I will leave you with this. May you live a life where the seeds of envy cannot grow. May you praise one another. May you lift each other up because we are all in this together. May you live a life worth living, recognizing that the ends do not justify the means. May you cling to God because He is standing right next to you in the